And do you see the meeting room, the waiting room?
Uh, I'll just jump on my other laptop and have a look.
I, I can just admit people. And I'm just going to engage in some shameless self-promotion now as well. Is that music coming through?
The world is telling stories of people, place, and time. Of looking back so we can go forward. Rewind, be kind. We hear beloved faces. Discover spaces, vestigial traces of the warp and weft of those who left and the ones who stayed behind. The warp and weft of those who left and the ones who stayed behind. Yawning, 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 telling stories.
Good afternoon, folks.
Clouds and
Just
grass
gonna
are
give a couple
fable.
more minutes for
Whole skies drift away.
others to join, and then we'll get
The
underway.
hope
It's
in
wonderful to see you all.
hands that open our choices today, every day, and so the walls are telling stories. The empty hallways always leave a song of looking back, so we can go forward somewhere to belong. Of going back, so we can look forward to somewhere to belong. Yawning, 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 telling stories. Yawning, 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 telling stories.
So Ben, have you got eyes on the waiting list now? The waiting room?
Yeah, got eyes on the waiting list. I'll look after that, Neil, and
Awesome.
I'll also look after the chat. If people want to, as we're listening to our panelists, throw any questions in the chat, I can come back to them. And
Thanks.
yeah,
Thank you. Um, also would be good um, for those people who are wanting to claim CPD points. I just need to um, register back to the AASW that they've attended. So if there's some way to get a list of all the participants, that would be really good too. I don't know how we do that.
yeah,
Put that through chat.
yeah, I'll do a roll call.
Oh, brilliant. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to this event. It's marvelous to see you all here. My my name is Dr. Neil Hall, and I'm a social work academic at Western Sydney University. But I also am the chair of the AASW Men and Social Work Practice Group, who is organised this event today. Before we get underway, officially, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting. I'm coming to you from Darug and Gulangurra land in the beautiful Blue Mountains of Western Sydney. If you are familiar with the lands that you're on, please feel free to put that in the chat. I want to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Indigenous and First Nations people that are in the meeting, in the webinar with us today. I am not Indigenous. I am descended from colonists and convicts, but my family has kinship through marriage with the Gamilaroi and Warrnambool mobs. And I have been given permission from Darug elders to speak in language. And so I say to you, I probably not got this exactly right in pronunciation, but Bujari Gumara Minaga Waraming Arangora, which means good day, friends, and welcome to this place of learning. It's very exciting for me to have this excellent group of panelists to chat with today. I'll introduce them in a second, but just a couple of things to run through. We will be finished by 1 o'clock. We hope to chat for about half an hour or so and then provide some time for questions. Ben, wave your hand. Ben is going to keep an eye on the chat room if you are popping questions in there. And also for those of you that have registered through the AASW and want to claim this webinar for CPD points, we'll just also need to know that that you're in the room, and so that I can report back and say that you attended. So, Transformative Practice with Men and Boys. This is an event that we've organised as our practice group, and we did also are also coinciding it with National Men's Health Week, even though that was 2 weeks ago. But our timing was didn't quite line up. But I want to delighted to introduce our panelists. When I introduce you, you can wave your hand so that. But Andy Haslam. Andy is a social worker with over 30 years of experience in child protection and youth justice systems. As a caseworker, youth worker, manager, specialist, senior policy writer, and he's also, very glad to say, a sessional academic with us at Western Sydney Uni. In recent years, Andy has been supporting casework practitioners respond to sexuality and gender diverse young people in the out-of-home care system. He is a father of 4 children and a recent grandparent. Not many people will admit to that. And lives in Western Sydney with his partner Ivan and 2 dogs. And his hobbies are woodwork, gardening and vinyl record collecting. Great to have you here with us, Andy.
Pleasure.
Dylan's actually a graduate of our social work program at Western Sydney University and has worked in therapeutic roles, casework and project experience in the areas of child protection, youth work and working with young people who have engaged in harmful sexual behaviour. He's currently employed with New South Wales Health as a counsellor at New Street, which works with young people aged 10 to 17 and their families where problematic, harmful sexual behaviour has been substantiated but with no criminal charges made. And finally, I want to introduce AJ Williams-Chen. AJ is a very experienced social worker as well in health, community services, education, employment, Aboriginal health and wellbeing. He's also been a nurse, a youth worker, a diversity officer and a career counsellor, so multiple qualifications. AJ's also of Wiradjuri and Wajibulak descent, and is the director and founder of Gurue Ganyi Consultancy. He's an accredited mental health first aid trainer, among other things, and works across Australia, travelling to rural and remote Aboriginal communities, doing mental health and resilience workshops, cultural awareness training as well, and facilitates mentoring programs at Brighton Grammar School, Scotch College in Melbourne, and developing cultural activities for the Indigenous male students. So very, very happy to have you all with us. I wonder if I might just go to Dylan first and describe a little bit about the work that you do, if you could.
No worries. Again, hi everyone. It's awesome to have everyone joining today. I mentioned in the chat, but I am calling today from the beautiful lands of the Gadigal people of the Darug Nation. I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and to offer those respects to any of our Aboriginal colleagues who have joined the call today. So in terms of New Street, so we work with quite a broad array of young people and their families. So what the referral criteria to our service looks like is a young person has been substantiated of using problematic or harmful sexual behavior, but hasn't qualified for a response through the youth justice system by virtue of not being charged. We do lots of work with young men, because 90% of our young people who attend our service are young men. And we also engage them and their families around one, how we support young people to not go on to demonstrate further harmful behavior, how we can support those young people to be able to offer an apology or an act of restitution to the people that they've harmed. And our third goal, which I think is a really, really fundamental goal, and I think it speaks to a lot of the transformative practice stuff that I'm hoping that we'll also get to speak to today, is having a focus on the well-being of young people and thinking about kind of in the broad scope of what social work practice or the broad scope of what intervention looks like. Well-being plays a fundamental role across all disciplines when we're thinking about how young people connect and relate to their world, how they belong to particular relational groups, the types of feedback that they receive from community, from culture, from spirituality, from kinship, from networks. There's a lot of things that underpin kind of well-being dynamics that has major implications for the work that I think all of us do. And for me, that's where I think quite a lot of the transformative stuff can also occur. So again, I'm really, really hopeful and really optimistic about some of the things that will be discussed today, and looking forward to sharing and learning from everyone who's on the call.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. Andy, how does that compare to the kind of work you do?
Oh, thanks, Neil. So I work in more of a policy space. So in terms of transformational policy work, I suppose, by the way, Neil, am I allowed to swear in this? I may get one through, but
we should actually, it's a good point, Andy. Maybe we should give a censorship warning.
I'll try not to.
With a L and a A.
So as you said, Neil, I'm a practitioner with many years of experience. One of the reasons why I came into the policy space in DCJ's head office is, I guess at the time, was a frustration with policy. It sometimes felt to me like the solution to a problem being experienced in practice was to write another policy. We used to refer to it as another fucking policy. So one of the reasons why I came into central office was, I guess, to be more transformational about the way we deliver policy to practitioners. So for me, transformational policy development is about engaging end users heavily in the development of policies. So that includes both young people in out-of-home care as well as practitioners, as well as I'm sure you're aware that writing and publishing a policy doesn't necessarily result in change. So I'm quite passionate about implementing policies getting that practice uplift, supporting practitioners to actually deliver the policy in their practice lives.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hope we'll come back to it later when we talk about what we're talking about when we mean transformation, like, because it's transformation at practice level, it's transformation at policy level. It's actually not just transformative for the men and boys we work with, but also indeed for the profession. AJ, I did my best to summarize the kind of thing kind of work you're involved in, but tell us a little bit about the sort of things that you do, and particularly with some of the young men that you work with.
I run a couple of mentoring programs at, it was at 4 schools. Now it's this year, it's only 3. But it's actually looking at, for where I work with, it was mainly with Aboriginal boys. I just got a couple of notes to remind myself here, but about 50% of the Aboriginal kids that I work with don't even know what cultural background they come from. They know they're Aboriginal, but can't tell you any more than that. The other 50 are connected to culture, and about 10% of those are kids from remote areas. So we notice that the kids with remote areas are very connected to culture. They'll have initiation processes. They're very involved in their own culture, and they're in classrooms with other kids that are just kind of identifying their Aboriginality, but don't know a lot about it. We do notice that about 75% of the Aboriginal kids don't, while they're in Melbourne, are not actually participating in anything cultural if they're not on their own cultural lands. So what my programs try to do is get the kids together, actually have conversations around culture, making culture a more open concept, not just related to their own personal space, but let's explore Aboriginal cultures in general with guidance and permission of the traditional owners. I am allowed to kind of facilitate a learning process for them where they get to explore different aspects of culture that might not even be their own, that might be other people's culture. For example, with one of the schools I've just worked with, out of the 10 boys that worked there, not only one of them could dance, the rest of them had no dancing ability whatsoever. So we've organised a cultural dancer to come in to show them teach them 3 dances. My background is dancing and ballet when I was a kid, so I'm more there for style and formation. But actually watching the kids in 3 hours go from not understanding a single step to becoming a bit of a dance troupe, including understanding the story of the songs, understanding the movements of the songs, and it's getting them connected to culture in really unique ways that they wouldn't normally be able to actually do. And watching them transform from I can't do this to oh my God, we can do this is what I try to achieve in every session that I'm actually with them. I want to see them. And the other thing too is that one of the projects that I did that you can go to my YouTube channel to check it out is that at Scots College, we interviewed the boys over a 2-year period, and we're asking them questions about how they see culture, how they see leadership, and re-asking them the questions every couple of months. And we repackaged it so you can hear their stories, but they also share stories about of the racism that they experience right now and their personal experiences of how they're going to teach culture to their kids when they don't know it themselves. Yeah. And that's really boys that are 14 and 15 and 16 to talk about how they're going to pass culture on to their kids when some of them don't even know it. So yeah, that's kind of what I do. That's
amazing. I like the way you phrased it. I can't do this, but we can do this. And that seems to be a powerful kind of transition.
Yeah, because Aboriginal people, we work on community. And the Aboriginal boys by themselves often feel really isolated, but as a group can achieve many great things. It takes a village to raise a family. It takes a village to teach people how to trust in each other.
Yeah, that's a great point. Andy, Dylan, what do you kind of see of the village in the kind of work you do, or the place of community?
I'm more than happy to go because this one for me is a big one. Um, across so many different parts of the lives of young people, you can see the utility of connection. You also see the detriment of isolation. You can see what happens when young people are experience disconnection from family, from culture, from kinship, and from knowledge of their story. And having in previous lives worked in child protection, out of home care, and kind of done some training across that stuff, you come to see and you come to experience what is lost in the process of the child protection system. Like there are lots of things where young people, whether through practice or whether through um, whatever has led to family, children, young people coming into care, from poor follow-up, you see things get lost, and you see that those things, whether they're semantic or whether they're narrative, come to actually represent a portion of a young person's life and story. And to be able to progress without that has detrimental implications for both that young person in a moment in time, but also how they come to form identity in future. And I think that also sits with when we're talking about working with men and when we're talking about working with dads, is that you then, if you timeline that kind of stuff, you can potentially do some stuff where you look at, I'm working with a socially disaffected or relationally disaffected dad who may have experienced similar things themselves. So I think when we're talking about connection, like I know one of the things that we do in New Street, and it's one of the things I really, really like, is at the end of a 6-week assessment, it's mandatory for any Aboriginal young person to have cultural consults. We have consultancy where we have to, and the reason that we have to, and I use the word have to, and I don't want it to sound like it's something that is a negative, but it has to happen, which I think is a fundamental thing in terms of practice. It's that how can we go about talking about connection and integration and well-being if we don't have a focus on the connection that a young person has to kinship, culture, and land. I feel like I could go on for this for a while. So Andy, if you want to jump in, you are more than welcome to.
So, by way of explanation, as a department, we've gone from having no policy in relation to sexuality and gender diversity to having actually quite a significantly detailed and comprehensive policy based on evidence and research. So we also, from that, launched a practice consultation program. I guess it's similar, Dylan, to what you do in relation to Aboriginal children, where we have a large pool of departmental casework practitioners that have lived experience of being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex. So what we offer caseworkers is the opportunity to consult with us in relation to particular young people that are coming out or expressing sexuality or gender diversity. And one of the most important things that we do as part of those consultations is actually, I think, Neil, you were talking about community, is we try to connect those young people up with their people. So quite a lot of the times those young people are feeling a sense of isolation, particularly young people in regional areas where there aren't a lot of services. So it's a really critical part of that consultation process to connect them up with both online groups as well as face-to-face groups. And I'm going to use the word queer instead of LGBTQIA+, just for ease of use. But we connect them up with queer-friendly services, both face-to-face and online. One of the challenges with that is that not all queer groups are good. So we try to connect young people up with groups that we know work from an evidence base and have a long history of experience in clinical practice. So the organisations we connect young people to tend to be organisations like 2010, which is based in Surrey Hills, but reaches out across a number of areas. They also run groups like Out West, which is a face-to-face youth group that's accessible via I think it's Discord. We connect up trans young people, trans young males, trans males to the Trans Hub. And there are a range of other organisations that we try to use to create community. And effectively, they offer young people youth groups, both online and face-to-face.
What challenges do you find with that, or in any of the work that you're doing in that space?
I think the challenges, I've mentioned one of the challenges is that not all queer services are good services. So we always try and stay on top of the services that are going to provide evidence-based care to young people. Probably one of the other concerns that, or the challenges we find is that young people's exposure to pornography. So we find, and
hi guys, welcome to our latest podcast of Black Yarns. Tonight I've actually got PJ here to talk to us.
Sorry, someone's. We've got it.
I'm not sure.
I think someone hit my link.
Is someone meant to be on mute?
That's.
I think should I keep going now?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Yeah.
Okay, so we know from the research that young people are accessing pornography at increasing rates, but interestingly, in relation to men and boys, aged 14 to 17 years, the research shows us that they're most frequently accessing pornography. And so, one of the things that concerns us is that routinely viewing sexualized images and videos, it's likely to reinforce harmful gender stereotypes, and it promotes and normalizes unsafe sexual practices. And it also contributes to young people, queer males, forming quite unrealistic expectations of sexual practice. So that's one of the things that we see quite routinely. The other thing we see, and I'll be quick, is the presence of microaggression, both in casework practice as well as a whole range of other spaces like education and health. And that can be, we're all guilty, I think, of microaggression, unintentional, albeit, but it can involve us challenging things like, for example, if we get an education report that uses a young person's dead name, a trans male's dead name, or their incorrect gender, we'll send it back and ask for it to be rewritten. So there's some of the challenges that we face in working with young people, queer young people in out-of-home care.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. AJ, what? I imagine there might be some similar challenges that you face, but you may face some quite unique ones as well.
Look, one of the biggest challenges is trying to get non-Indigenous teachers to understand where some of the boys might be at different aspects of their life. One example, just what people don't really think about, is that in classes, kids learn about Aboriginal culture. They also are starting to learn some of the latest stats and facts, like the median age for an Aboriginal person is 24 years of age. Yet when they're trying to work with a 17-year-old or 18-year-old boy, and they're asking those questions like, what do you want to do after school and where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Some of them stop and actually go, well, what's the point? I've only got like 5 or 6 years to be halfway through my whole life. And it's like that. It's like every Aboriginal kid that I've worked with had that fatalistic thought process. It doesn't last forever, but it kind of hits them when they get asked that question, like in year 11, and then talking to the teachers, because this is the kids' reality as well. Because when the teachers go, I don't understand, the kids themselves will actually say, well, on a community level, on a family level, I'm going to funerals of aunties and uncles in community that are 45 to 55 years of age. And, when they're starting to look at their median age being 24, it kind of hits them really hard, because the reality is these kids are actually coming from places where if they're not in the child protection system or juvenile justice system, they're living with family members that are either their brothers are, their sisters are, their cousins are, their uncles are, and trying to get people to understand the teachers to understand how recent in history some of these traumas actually are. Everyone's focusing on working with a trauma-informed practice. My biggest question that I raise to anyone who's working with trauma-informed practice, unless you really know the history of Aboriginal people, because trauma started with colonization, but there's so much more of Aboriginal history and so much recent history. I don't know how people are doing trauma-informed practice when they don't really understand the history of Aboriginal people and how recent some of this trauma really actually is.
Neil, can I jump in just quickly and just furiously agree with AJ, and I'll just add to that. We quite often talk to practitioners about trauma-informed practice, and we'll say words to the effect of, so what is trauma-informed practice to you? And frequently practitioners can say the words trauma-informed practice or trauma-informed care, but they don't know what it is. And so one of the challenges for us is to help practitioners effectively do trauma-informed practice. So it means, what do I do tomorrow that I'm not doing today that makes my practice trauma-informed? And that's part of the uphill challenge that we have.
Can I piggyback on this one as well? Because it's a three-word phrase that gets me, because I think for a service, for a professional body for us as professionals to embody trauma-informed care, again, that there's the safety, consistency, predictability, like that there are those kind of dynamic elements that I think are quite they're present in text. But when we're talking about translation to practice and what that looks like, when you have a young person who has been diagnosed with ADHD, has been given Ritalin until the cows come home, and there's been zero behavioral change, my thought is, okay, in what ways do trauma-associated behaviors map with ADHD symptoms? You have a child who is unable to sit still. Is that hypervigilance or is that ADHD? You have a child in a classroom who becomes rapidly dysregulated when a teacher raises their voice. Is that ADHD or domestic violence exposure? And we quite often measure the goodness or the sociability of a child by their ability to be compliant and their ability to sit still and not make noise. But if you're a young person with complex trauma and you struggle to do that, you're inherently labeled as a bad kid. There's a lot of really complicated dynamics in what trauma actually looks like, and that lack of congruence between the evolving, like you can go back to the 90s and look at Bruce Perry's stuff around, how they start to map, the neurosequential brain development, and how a lack of, stimulation in early childhood, or whether it's through ACT or omission, can lead to different parts of the brain under or overdeveloping. And then you then map that across what that actually looks like in behavior. You then have these unrealistic expectations of kids who are still trying to catch up in many ways. It's like a kid starting a 100-meter sprint 10 meters back from the other kids, because whether through a lack of, whether through being in a space of survival has, that has been the primary need of that young person, which means that, these executive functions around, let's talk about cognition and let's talk about rationality, they are upper end functions that your brain won't prioritize if you're in a space of feeling unsafe. It's one of those things where I'm just like, we have the literature, we have the knowledge, and then I think, when we kind of look at some of those micro, meso, macro kind of factors, that doesn't generally tend to translate. So look, sorry to get on.
No. I mean, you've made a really good point there about the multiple layers, and if our social work training teaches us to look through those multiple layers, to not just simplify it into a cause and effect from one thing. When we're thinking about making our practice with men and boys transformative, what are some of the kind of key values and skills that you think are important? I'll run to you, AJ, first.
I go for, well, I have conversations with the boys about what they want to do, so it's driven by them. But I'm always trying to look at things that are unique and creative and things that don't sit in the box, things that pipe their interest a little bit, even if they've heard about something but want to know more about it. Well, let's explore it all together. It's about trying to create. I'll do a little more self-promotion for 1 second, but I think the boys were saying to me while we're doing the project of their recording is that they seem to become the tokenistic kid in the class, that every issue about an Aboriginal thing gets thrown to them. And the boys said, I wish we could record some of the frequently asked questions. And I went, why can't we? So I went and sought some funding because all the boys got paid for their stories and what they shared. And the boys decided to script a 5-minute, up to 5 minutes, about breaking some sort of stereotype or a fact that people need to know about what is the Aboriginal flag, what's the Torres Strait Islander flag, what's closing the gap. And they scripted it and wrote it. And then we actually recorded it, edited it, and then they're actually now put up onto the YouTube channel. And with permission of the school and their families, I use them now in my cultural awareness training as pre-work that people need to watch. But the boys love it so much that anytime their teacher is actually asking them the same question the following year, they go, you need to watch the videos because we've already answered these questions, not just in class, but we've answered them now publicly for you to actually watch. And I love watching them grow in terms of the uniqueness of ideas that they come up with. Just recently, at the last project I did at Scots College was one of the boys was watching YouTube and saw some kangaroo skin burning. And when I did a little bit of investigation with some of their families, they go, none of the communities that they work with actually do kangaroo skin burning. So I actually organised one of the elders, one of the Bunurong people to come in and actually show the boys how to actually do kangaroo skin burning. And again, some of them don't think they've got any artistic ability at all, but once they start getting into it and seeing the others doing it, it just takes over. You can see a light bulb go on their head going, oh my God, we can do this. Look what we're creating together. And they put all the skins together and made a huge big pattern. So even though they were doing it individually, it became one big part of the big puzzle.
That's amazing. It still comes back to that shifting away from the individualized approach into that community approach.
You can't dance by yourself.
Yeah.
Create by yourself. You need the thought process of everybody to bring it all together.
Yeah. Andy, I know you're very, very strong on the idea of being guided by the young people themselves.
Yeah, yeah, I am. I think is this Neil? Is this in relation to skills that are helpful?
Yeah, skills and values. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think I speak often, partly from a policy context and partly from a practice context. But I think the first skill, I think, really, without wanting to spend too much time on it, is working with trauma. So I often encourage practitioners to think about when they're talking to a trans male or a young male in out-of-home care that's coming out. What sort of brain am I working with? Am I working with a young person that's hypo or hyper aroused? Frequently, it's one or the other. It's rarely ever that a young person that is experiencing the emergence of their sexuality or gender identity. It's rarely that they're sitting quietly in the window of tolerance. They're not there. So think about what sort of brain that they're working with, and also bring into practice some of the really basic social work theory that, for example, when we think about Piaget's stages of development, think about formal operational development. If you're working with a young person that's, struggling with their sexuality or gender identity, and that young person is 10 or 11 years of age, they may not be able to think about that in an abstract way. So think about what do these stages of cognitive development tell me about the type of work I need to do with this particular young person.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, Dylan, you mentioned earlier, the impact that the kind of work we do might have on adult males, and particularly as they're becoming fathers. So, what's kind of really important for you in making your practice transformative, for young men heading towards adulthood?
I just looked at how much time we had and realized I was like, I probably shouldn't get on my soapbox too much.
You've got 53 seconds.
There's a few. There's a few. For me, again, it's something that I remember really clearly in what unit was it? It was practical social work in my uni days. But you cannot, for the life of you, so you cannot undersell the value of a good thorough psychosocial in terms of understanding, at least at a base level, where someone's at, and then being able to then shift into spaces where you can look into broader things, like how do you map someone's relational world, how do you map someone's sense of identity, and how do you map for them, we can be really gung-ho as a profession with lots of things that we want to put in place and lots of things that we would like to refer into. But if we don't have a sense of where that person's at or what they need, then it's not going to eventuate in much. In other kind of things for me that I think are really important, social scripts and social narratives, this concept of almost, these transferable discourses across generations, and the importance and the significance of being able to engage. So for me, 70% of my young people have experienced trauma, but there's a 30% cohort approximately whose behaviors generate from senses of entitlement, or from senses of privilege, or from senses of not having certain things checked, or being told narratives that weren't great, or also socially learning through pornography. I think a really key skill is being able to find ways to professionally challenge in ways that uphold respect and dignity. You can offer things conversationally. You can bring things up in a space that don't challenge, because again, if you're bringing those things up directly, you could be opposing a view or an ideal that has been foundational in someone's life for a long time, but also that thought, value, and ideal hasn't been helpful to them across the lifespan. So as a cohort and as a profession, we need to know how to navigate tricky conversations. And also, when we see anger, like for me, this is a tricky one, because again, men, in terms of a lot of incident statistics, are quite prevalent as people who perpetrate types of harm and behaviors across the spectrum. But men, and this is being incredibly generalizing, so please feel free to tell me if it's wrong. But in my experience, men have often conveyed lots of emotions through anger. So anger is quite often a surface level emotion. It's one that we see quite prominently, and it's one that tends to evoke fear in us as practitioners. But when you often peel back anger, I use this activity with kids where it's an iceberg, and you see anger at the top, and then you look at the rest of the iceberg under the water, and you see shame, and you see embarrassment, you see rejection, you see all this kind of stuff that underpins. So I think, being able to hold that for some young people looking at anger, or for men looking at some of that stuff, whilst again, as professionals, we need to be safe and we need to tolerate certain things, we need to understand that there might be things that drive that.
Yeah, you're really capturing the complexity of it, Dylan. It's that sense of just that sense of being able to uphold those kind of values of respect and dignity that we're trying to encourage in all people we work with, and yet still start with their story and understand what's going on for them, I think has been really important. Just quickly, Andy, yeah?
Oh, yes, just quickly. So Dylan reminded me that when working with queer young people, maybe gay males or trans-identifying males, they often tend to be the victims or exposed to homophobia, microaggression, and other things. And so it's really important to remember when you're working with young males that the experience of coming out, I think, is not necessarily positive, and actually can cause harm. So that has big implications for the way in which you record and use information that they provide you, even in the way that you record them in your file, and making sure you're always led by the young person in terms of consent. Do they consent to have this information available to this person or that worker? Always checking back in with the young person to make sure that they feel comfortable about this information going from point A to point B.
Yeah, brilliant. Look, I think we'll take a few questions at this point and then just come back for a very quick wrap up at the end. As we're sorting through some of the questions, I do just want to give a shout out to people that have helped make this session happen. So Adrian, Rachel, wave your hands. Cheyenne was also involved as part of their student placements, and thanks to Ben as well. What have we got in questions, Ben?
Yes, we have well, a couple of questions from me trying to generate some questions. So we might come back to those if we need them, but some really good questions and comments. Sam writes, I often see the teachers in schools, in my experience, being the least mental health and trauma informed. I think having more teachers educated in both spaces would help. Maybe that's a comment that one of our panelists might be able to,
I'd like to hear AJ's thoughts on that, actually.
Yeah.
I think, look, mental health first aid itself should be taught to every teacher in the school, and it needs to be compulsory. The problem is that I know mental health first aid themselves have tried talking with Parliament and trying to get anything through Parliament is really hard, but it needs to be taught to every teacher. And I think the teen program in schools, there is a teen program aimed for kids looking after each other. That needs to be mandatory in all schools as well. Yeah, and also I'm going to say the history of Aboriginal people, trauma informed. You need to understand a bit what Andy was saying before. You need to understand the history of how people that have come out in the past have been treated, and then that explains. If you don't understand the trauma that they've experienced, then this is where this current trauma informed practice just doesn't work, because you don't actually understand what the traumas are.
I'm sure there'd be many of our teachers out there in the community who would love the opportunity to actually do that, find the time and be paid to do that. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
And thanks. I think like there was attempted programs. I don't know if it was just Southwest Sydney specific or if it was statewide. There was a program called School Link where it was our district CAM services, so the child adolescent mental health teams were had a partnership and an inroads into schools, and a lot of that was around how they would do that trauma informed training in certain kind of ways. But I think it's also the practicalities of having 30 little ones in a classroom, all of which potentially presenting with either individual or collective complex needs, and that when you're one person trying to juggle that, I think that's just a real stretch. I take my hat off to teachers, because it would not be an easy job.
A question for Andy. What can we do in terms of policy for young people's changing their names from a dead name? I understand one cannot change their name legally until the age of 18. In out-of-home care, I see many services we work with refer to young people by their dead name and refuse to or are unable to edit paperwork to reflect their new chosen names. This has proven to be a trigger for some young people. It's from Adrian.
So there is, I don't want to stray too much into the legal side of that, because we would need a legal practitioner here to talk about that. There is some capacity to change a young person's name, but it requires a high level of delegation. In terms of using a young person's identified name or chosen name, we get this question a lot. We have some practitioners and some of our contracted agencies that will decline to use a young person's identified name because they believe that there's some legal reason why they cannot. We've worked with our legal practitioners to come to an understanding that there's absolutely no reason why you can't use a young person's chosen name or identified name. You can use that name in school reports, health reports, correspondence. There is absolutely no impediment to using that name. And also we also encourage our practitioners, our contracted agencies to look at how their system can be modified, their information system can be modified to allow that to occur in a practice context. So we've modified our system on Child Story that allows us to use, we record a young person's birth name, but it allows us to use a young person's identified name on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Andy. We'll go to Dylan with this one. This is from Nivanka, who asks, how do you typically address social learning through pornography?
Thank you. It's a good question, because I think for a lot of our young people, this is something that is very likely present in the vast majority of our referrals. And there's lots of different ways you can go about it. I think for us, part of the reason that it's important is that I believe, my stats might be a bit rusty, but there is often a 3-year difference between the first time a young person watches pornography and the first time they engage in a sexual act. So, and that's not necessarily even harmful, that's relational stuff. So when you've got 3 years of learning intimacy, learning sex and connection, and that through pornography, there's often a lot that's also lost out when you're looking at how two people come to be in a relationship where they're engaging in that. Pornography doesn't model consent conversations. It doesn't model lots of particularly healthy things. In fact, again, rusty stats, but I believe 2 out of 3 pornography videos shows an act of violence, and then 94% of that violence is directed towards women. So what we're also learning in that space is we're not learning about consent. We're not learning about healthy relationships. We're actually learning to sexualize acts of violence. And part of the challenge can then become that there can be physiological stuff that goes along with that. So in terms of addressing it, in terms of challenging, I've done, there's like Marie Crabb is someone who does lots of really good work in this space. An activity called Real World versus Porn World. And you can actually get young people to kind of differentiate between what's real, what's pornographic. And a lot of young people don't know that they're actors. They don't know that they're that it's not realistic. It's not typical of most people's bodies and most people's preferences. You can talk about gender. You can talk about there's an interesting one, and this one's not done to shame. This one is actually done to get young people to think and reflect on ethics. It's a thing called the sunlight test. And it's often, I've done it in the past, where we look at the ethics that young people would hold face to face versus what young people would hold online, and then how they would feel if their online stuff was brought into the sunlight. You often see the color leave people's faces when they talk about, you know, the ethical kind of differences. And actually, a lot of young people that I've worked with don't always endorse what they see in pornography, but there can be this really complex dynamic between something that's really confronting and really challenging, but then a physiological sensation that makes you go, actually, my body enjoys this. So there's a lot to really pull apart. So how do I address it? Through trying to correct narratives, through having activities that promotes children and young people to think about what's real, what's not, to try then instill healthy relationships, stuff around okay touch and not okay touch, respecting boundaries and sexual ethics, as a summary.
Thanks, Dylan. I'm conscious, Neil, that we've got about 6 minutes left. And one final question in the chat. This is from Alex. And I'll direct this to AJ, if that's okay, AJ. Just thinking about you as a practitioner in this space, working with men and boys, and you're organizing all these activities, you're building skills very purposefully, you're attempting to build self-esteem, connection to all sorts of spiritual aspects of that young person that you're working with, as well as culture and all of those really deep, personal, very, very personal aspects of self within the boys' lives and the men that you're working with. How do you maintain boundaries, healthy boundaries, as a practitioner as you're getting so close and talking so deeply with these young people?
I think the first thing I saw the question Alex wrote, and I think that it's really defining what social work actually is. I've in 30 years, I graduated in 1997, and I've only ever held one position that's being called social worker. That doesn't mean what I don't do is not social work. So sometimes people get a bit confused because you don't hold the title social worker. I get, but are you really a social worker? Every listening skill, so every time I listen to a kid, I know I'm doing social work. Every time I'm doing some community development stuff, I'm doing social work. When I'm responding to issues, I'm still doing social work. Social work's about creating pathways and creating opportunities and creating sometimes the firsts in families that they may not even have that in their family before. Like, for example, this is the first generation of Aboriginal kids getting to year 12. So if I can help that kid get to year 12, if I can help that kid not go to child protection or not get themselves in juvenile justice settings, I might be helping to break some of the firsts. But there is a fine boundary, and the way that I actually hold it myself is that my job is to support these people to become, these young boys to become responsible men, and with permission of their, and this is done with permission of their families and permission with the schools. They can talk to me at any time through a variety of different means, as long as I keep all the information through emails or through messenger or the messengers. But we want them to be able to find a safe space to ask questions that they don't normally get to ask. For the Aboriginal boys that often don't know anything about pregnancy and girls, because they're sometimes seen as women's business, I'm going to give them the opportunity to have those discussions that they may not be able to actually have. And again, it's creating firsts is what I'm saying right now. And as a social worker, I think it's all our responsibilities to make sure that when you're working with Aboriginal people, at least, that you could be the change agent that can make that first occur in that family.
And to jump on that as well, I think one of the really good things, and we learn about self-determination quite early in the piece, but I love this concept, and for me, it's something that sits at the core of the very work that I try to do across the thing, is that our young men, our adult men, are not preordained to make the wrong choice. They have capacity to make choice. We want to give people the ability to know that they are able to develop skills, develop mindsets, and develop positions in which they are able to make choices that best meet their needs and the needs of others. I think that, and I don't know, Andy and AJ, if this has been your experience, but I know I've worked with a lot of young people who have preordained themselves to have negative outcomes in life. And they're things that through intervention and through connection and through things that they learn that actually I have the right to make choices that will better what my life trajectory or what my life experiences will be like. Yeah, I think that for me is one of the things that sits at the core.
Just quickly, I think that's true of many young people, queer young people. They experience a deep sense of internalized shame, and it's reinforced often by people close to them in their family that openly worry about what will happen to them, as whether they're gay males or whether they're trans males coming out. I think the really important part of that is to be connecting them up with their community so they can be given permission to actually have those greater goals for themselves. But I think that's the value of community.
Permission is a really good word there, and I know none of you have said the word, but I'm hearing hope, like enabling young people, young males, to have hope, and I think that pushes into working with adult males as well, and older males, still requiring to some extent permission to talk about what they're going through, and hope that something could be different. I've got a minute left, which I was going to, so sorry, Rada, but we can't get to your question. I was going to try and give you each 30 seconds to say one last thing about what makes your practice transformative. So,
Who's
AJ.
first now?
Yeah, AJ. 30 seconds. What makes your practice transformative?
Who are we talking to?
You, AJ.
Oh, sorry, guys. I'm waiting. Look, I think being as creative as possible, being unique, stepping outside of boxes, allowing the voices of the young men to actually be heard, and creating platforms. I try to create platforms as a leader. I'm not always the one up the front. I'm the one that might be up the back pushing them along, or I set the stage and put the spotlight onto other people. That's
Marvelous. Thanks. Dylan?
While I work with young people who have sexually harmed, what we want is for them to have a sense of accountability and to have a sense of what they've done and to be able to offer something to the person that they've harmed. But we also realize that when I work with a young person, we're not working with an adult. We're working with a young person who is yet to have identity formed and constructed and is yet to develop who they are in the world. And for me, that's at the core of transformative stuff, that social butterfly effect, that if we can intervene and we can do stuff well at a particular point, that the trajectory of our young people can be better.
Fantastic. And Andy?
I would say all social work practice should be transformative, and if it's not, it's probably not social work practice. So I would say I would encourage people that to make sure that their practice is deliberate and purposeful. Deliberately bring theory and evidence into your social work practice and experiment with ways of using that in your one-on-one interactions with men and boys.
Thank you so much. They're marvelous answers and put on the spot in that way. I want to give, again, a big thank you to AJ, Andy, and Dylan for leading us through that conversation. Big thank you again to Adrian, Rachel, Cheyenne, and Ben for helping set the whole thing up. And I really hope it's been of worth for all of you who've been in the journey with us today. Thank you very much, and you may hear from us again in the future.
Thank you for your time,
Thanks,
everyone.
Bill.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Neil. Thank you, AJ. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Dylan. Appreciate all your time, your efforts, your words.
Thanks, everyone.
It's amazing.
Yeah, awesome stuff.
Thanks for having us.
It was a bit of a
Thanks,
wild
Tracy.
ride.
that was
All
fun.
right.
Yeah, that was great, and great attendance.
Great
Yeah.
attendance. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
AJ, I'd love your YouTube channel.
Oh, thank you.
Could we send that out to people?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy.
I hope I had the right link there, AJ, in the chat.
You did.